my business partner, Storm, was listening to a podcast, and we are from Oklahoma. The Oklahoma City Thunder is here. And so he was interested in what trades were happening over the summer. And he was like, man, I wish I could hear what all of these podcasts are saying about these trades and not have to go and search myself. And so we were like, this could be an interesting way to utilize AI to analyze transcripts to build a product experience where you can find new clips and you can understand what's happening in a particular community. And our take on communities are like media bubbles. And so we wanted to build an experience that we could deliver something to people for them to see the information they cared about that links directly to the highlight of something that was said in maybe a multi-hour show.
Welcome to the Business Bitcoinization Show, the show dedicated to helping you enrich your life and grow your business with Bitcoin, the hardest money on planet Earth. I'm your host, Josh Friedman, and our guest today is Kaz Bycko, who is the founder of Bubbl.fm, which is a new podcasting 2.0 app that also uses AI to synthesize information about a particular topic, for instance, Bitcoin or geopolitics, or maybe your favorite sports team, and gives that to you in a weekly digest. So you can see not only what the podcasts you're currently listening to are saying, but also be introduced to new podcasts that are talking about the same topic. We're going to get to our interview with Kaz right after this. Business owners, unlock the benefits Bitcoin has to offer your business with the Bitcoin for Business Quick Start Guide. This 27-page guide highlights the 6 ways you can grow your business with Bitcoin. Check it out in the show notes. Kaz, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Josh, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'd like to start off every single interview with a few questions that help us to get to know you a little bit better and give us some insight for our own lives. So you ready for these?
Let's go.
Question number 1 is this. When and how did you first learn about Bitcoin?
So I first found Bitcoin, I was a sophomore in college, actually, and I was studying economics and information systems. So a little bit of technology, a little bit of brainwashed economics. And I was kind of sitting at the nexus of Bitcoin, and I thought I wanted to do cybersecurity. So I was teaching myself, how to use Kali Linux and some of these tools to, analyze my network traffic and learn about cybersecurity. And as I was doing that, I stumbled across Bitcoin. It was kind of tangentially related at the time. And I really struck my interest, and I said, wow, this is way cooler than cybersecurity. And my journey into Bitcoin did not begin from a monetary perspective or a Austrian economic perspective. It was purely a technology architecture perspective. And how did the system work? I was essentially majoring in systems thinking. And so I started to dissect and analyze it, and I found it very novel.
So that's interesting. Do you feel like you understood what it was and why it was as strong as it was from the very beginning? Or the reason I ask is because I've chatted with a number of people who got into Bitcoin really early, and I certainly didn't. I'd be curious to know if I'm curious to know if I would have stayed in and stayed, not been shaken out back in 2013, 2015, 2017. And I'd like to think I wouldn't be, but you just don't know. Did understanding Bitcoin's structure help you to feel more confident in it from day one?
I would say I did not fully understand what Bitcoin was from a technical perspective when I first started to look into it. It more struck so like a curiosity in me and an itch that I just couldn't stop scratching, more so because I couldn't understand it. I could see enough of it and understand just enough to see that it was going to be extremely powerful. But I remember the first couple times, like when I was trying to read the white paper and then condense an aspect of how Bitcoin worked and think about how would I even explain this to somebody who doesn't understand technology at all. I couldn't even recite, like I'd have to repeat the same phrases over and over again to nail them into my head, to even conceptualize some of the aspects of how it worked. And so it did not come instinctive to me, but there was an intuitive, like, this is something I need to be researching. And no matter if I can understand it from the start, I know that I will eventually be able to. And so now I've come to the point where I almost think in terms of how Bitcoin works. And then when I'm learning something new, I find it very easy to connect different patterns and themes that may not seem intuitive anymore. But after a decade, and you think about something long enough, you do start to understand it in different ways.
Absolutely. Question number 2, what's an insight or fact about Bitcoin that you wish everyone understood?
So this is going to be a contentious take. So right now there's a big argument around ossification versus development happening around Bitcoin. There's all sorts of different proposals at all times. My general consensus is that we can't stop Bitcoin development because of these new monetary arguments that are starting to emerge. And we have to acknowledge that Bitcoin is a living system and we have to continue to adopt and change it. And if we just let Bitcoin ossify right now, I think that's actually how Bitcoin will fail.
Interesting. And to go a little bit further into that is a bit of a hot take, although I think there's probably a number of people that would agree strongly with you. Do you feel like it would just, do you think it would not continue because there would be something else that would rise up, or would the possibility of some sort of decentralized digital currency just fall away if Bitcoin didn't work out?
I think it's the latter. So I don't see something replacing Bitcoin because of a technical limitation of Bitcoin. However, there are aspects of the Bitcoin protocol that if we do not upgrade them, things will break. I also think we're seeing a bit of an attack that's disguised as adoption. And so right now we're, 2 years ago, if you asked any Bitcoiner, they would say we're firmly in the and then they fight you stage. I mean, we had the attack on Bitcoin banks and Bitcoin companies, Operation Choke Point 2.0. But now it's like, the administration changed. There's talk of Bitcoin strategic reserve bills. There is what I would call a comfortable camouflage of some of these shitcoins and meme coins that are distractions in a good way from Bitcoin that take some of the pressure off. But if we were to just let Bitcoin run and not ever change it, I see the real threat as being custodial capture. And so, like, the fact that Bitcoin's at 100,000 right now, we have all of this nation state and Fortune 500 adoption seemingly on the way, and the mempool's completely dead. That's not really a good thing. It's not the end of the world. And if you're a Bitcoin user, it's great to be able to still send low sat for BByte transactions. But in terms of network activity, it's a bit scary because it's showing how much Bitcoin is sitting in the hands of custodians. And that puts a risk of paper Bitcoin and other things in terms of these ETFs specifically. Like, they are restricting and consolidating the voting rights on behalf of a lot of the ownership of Bitcoin now. And so I see risks associated with that. I'm not trying to blackpill at all. I think it's just important to acknowledge that we need to continue to improve Bitcoin. And there are privacy aspects and other things that still are yet to be explored, in my opinion. Very interesting.
So question number 3 is, what's the Bitcoin resource you most recommend to other people?
That's a good question. I try not to cookie cutter what I recommend to people because everybody sees Bitcoin from a different angle. And the longer you're around Bitcoin, the more resources you start to gather up. And I start to think of more, who is this person and what is their worldview of how they're approaching Bitcoin? Somebody who is more conservative and is talking about money printing may have like a different view or a magnetism towards Bitcoin than somebody with more of a liberal viewpoint, who's approaching it from a human rights perspective, or the ability for anybody to use Bitcoin without it censoring or controlling people based on ethnicity or anything like that. So I try to ask enough questions or build up enough of a understanding of who that person is and how they approach thinking in general. And then I try to rack my brain and find the best resource. It's usually a book, though. I like when people read. I usually don't send them a podcast to start.
It seems like a lot of people don't read all that much. Are there certain books that you find that people are willing to pick up and work through? Or is it just that after a certain point, if they're interested enough, they'll be willing to read a book? Like, do you have a book you just recommend to someone you're chatting with and you find that they're likely to actually pick it up and read it?
My favorite one to recommend just on a general basis is The Price of Tomorrow, because I've recommended the Bitcoin Standard probably the most, and I don't want to, talk down on any book. I think they're all great resources depending on who you're speaking to. But just not everybody's interested in all of the history of central banking. And so putting in perspective of the future, this is something I try to think about as well. It's like looking at things through a white mirror versus a black mirror. And sometimes I think people come to Bitcoin because of nihilism, and they understand, it's like the money is broken, but then they find Bitcoin and it gives them like a little inkling of hope. That's an example of this white mirror sort of thinking. And I try to pitch any sort of technology in that frame. And so it's a bit of an inversion of how people would probably approach, I don't know, let's do something a little bit more dystopian than Bitcoin, like AI. A lot of people just, because of things they've seen in movies or whatever, they just have a natural nihilistic or pessimistic view of how these things could play out in the future. And I think if we just can reframe that and say, well, these things actually help you and enable you to be more human and connect in new and innovative ways and free your time instead of making you confined or whatever.
Question number 4 is this: beyond Bitcoin, what's a resource, tool, or idea that's been helpful to you or your work recently?
It's a good transition into AI. And so it was 3 years ago, my business partners and I started a Bitcoin mining company. And this was right when LLMs and ChatGPT-3 were really hitting the scene. And we started to just integrate AI into every aspect of how we were working. We did that for a few years. And then once we started this new company, a lot of it is built on AI, but I would never call us an AI company. I think AI is going to change how people work and how people build products. And it will be a theme that's underlying in the best businesses that should not be overt. That's very similar to how I think about Bitcoin. And since we were all Bitcoiners, whenever we started to work on this new company, it's like these things should naturally come out as an extension of the product, as an extension of the ethos who is building those products as well. And so we were just naturally Bitcoiners. We were naturally working with AI for a few years. And so once we started to work on this new business, it's like we use those and we utilize those tools because at the end of the day, they're the best tools. And so, that's my spiel. I think there is a little bit of an inversion right now in the Bitcoin space because there is a lot of money being invested in it, maybe over-invested in it. There is a lot of hype and there's a lot of hype tweets. But once you actually start to use the tools and learn to build with them, it's pretty insane what you can do to your productivity.
So now we have our final, what we call our arbitrary but insightful question, and it's this: as a general life principle, is it better to ask why or why not?
Why not? And so to me, this relates to the white mirror, the techno-optimism versus techno-nihilism conversation. Asking why is a nihilistic question. It's like, why do anything? Why should I have to do this? Versus why not go and do this? I'm very much a proponent of entrepreneurialism. I know you are too. I think that is very recognizable in most Bitcoiners because from an onset, just adopting Bitcoin as a Bitcoiner, putting, your life savings into it in some cases, like that is a very entrepreneurial move in and of itself. You have to have conviction. And so I like to look at everything through this white mirror. And so I have to go with why not.
Today's episode of Business Bitcoinization is proudly brought to you by Velis Commerce, where the future of business technology meets Bitcoin. As we journey through the era of Bitcoin and its transformational impact on businesses, there's one name that stands out: Velis Commerce. Whether you're looking to build a cutting-edge website, a seamless mobile app, or custom software, Velis is your go-to team. They've been diving deep into the world of Bitcoin since 2014, making them one of the most experienced groups for integrating Bitcoin and Lightning payments into a variety of digital platforms. But here's what truly sets them apart. Velis Commerce doesn't just build. They bring a wealth of knowledge to ensure your project's success from day one. Their team understands the nuances of Bitcoin, ensuring that your business stays ahead of the curve. And for all business Bitcoinization listeners out there, Velis Commerce is offering a free consultation to kickstart your project the right way. So if you're ready to future-proof your business in the coming age of hyper-Bitcoinization, head over to veliscommerce.com or reach out on Twitter at veliscommerce. Let's make sure your business thrives in the Bitcoin era. If you are hit by a bus right now, could your family access your Bitcoin? When's the right time to stop hodling and use Bitcoin to impact your family's lives, not just yours? What if Bitcoin doesn't reach the value you expect, or it takes longer to reach that value? Do you have a plan? Do you have the proper trust structure to avoid probate, maintain your privacy, and minimize taxes? Do you want to avoid taxes to stack more sats or leverage your stack without selling? Should you add Bitcoin to your business's balance sheet? Are you truly confident in your self-custody setup? If any of those questions made you stop and think, you probably realize that simply buying and holding Bitcoin is not a complete financial plan. That's where Strong Wealth comes in. Orange-pilled advisors blending traditional financial planning with deep Bitcoin expertise, giving you the best of both worlds, so you can sleep peacefully knowing you're making the right moves for your family no matter what happens. Schedule a free call at strongwealth.net. That's strongwealth.net. Strong Wealth, wealth management for Bitcoiners by Bitcoiners. Well, Kaz, we're here today to talk about your new business venture, Bubbl.fm. It's a podcasting 2.0 app, but there are some additional features you're bringing to Bubbl that I think a lot of people would be interested to hear about. So if you would just share with us about Bubbl, kind of how it came to be, as well as some of the new additions that you're bringing to people's experience with podcasts.
Absolutely. So we are Bubbl. Bubbl.fm is the domain. We are a new podcasting platform, and we make it easy and beautiful to experience the new 2.0 features from a listening perspective, and we make that easier if you're a podcaster. And so we actually didn't start with the idea of building a podcast app, even though probably about 2 or 3 years ago, right whenever Nostr was really hitting the scenes. I actually think it was the day Jack Dorsey joined Nostr. I'd made an account. I had heard of it before that, but never really dug too deep. And again, I approach most things from a technology architecture perspective. And so started digging into Nostr and immediately sent a message in my Slack. And I was like, guys, this is like podcasting 3.0. If you can do Nostr plus Bitcoin plus RSS feeds with these new tag systems, like you can enable completely new experiences. And this was like in December of 2022, I think. And so we were working on the mining company. Again, this was just a crazy bad idea. And we had no intention of building anything like that until about last summer. My business partner, Storm, was listening to a podcast. And we are from Oklahoma. The Oklahoma City Thunder is here. And so he was interested in what trades were happening over the summer. And he was like, man, I wish I could hear like what all of these podcasts are saying about these trades and not have to go and search myself. And so we had been building with AI for 2 years inside of a different business at this point. And so we were like, this could be an interesting way to utilize AI to analyze transcripts to build a product experience where you can find new clips and you can understand sort of what's happening in a particular community. And our take on communities are like media bubbles. And so that kind of played into the name of the company there. It's like, in some ways, you're trapped inside of a bubble on timelines, or maybe you only get in a habit of listening to certain podcasts, and then maybe it's difficult to find something new. Or you go to a feed, your Twitter feed, and you're looking for a certain kind of content, and you get distracted with ads and other things that you're not trying to see. And so we wanted to build an experience that we could deliver something to people that eliminated those distractions for them to see the information they cared about, and then link directly to the clips, which is one of those features of podcasting 2.0 that I think really enables virality and engagement with podcasters and their audience, is the ability to share this good looking content across media that links directly to the highlight of something that was said in maybe a multi-hour show. And so the original product was built around what we call digests. And so we now have 120 of these different digests. We have one for Bitcoin, one for geopolitics, one for financial markets, tons of different sports teams. And we'll be able to build this across different topics or communities. And you can subscribe to these things. You can get an unlimited version of it and get anything you want. And then we also have a 2.0 player now built into the same app. And so you can go from reading this digest and finding a clip to then listening to this new episode in the same player, stumbling across new content.
So the primary experience, kind of the starting point, is it sounds like it's the weekly digest, where you take a look at it, you read through it, and you would potentially click through to a podcast if the clip was interesting to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's a really cool idea, and I think it's great. You know, a lot of podcasters. Maybe this was different early on. I've heard people, talking about how it's great to be on the front page, so to speak, of Apple Podcasts, great discoverability, virality. That doesn't really exist in podcasts anymore. So I feel like this is a really cool way for podcasters who are talking, basically being connected to a very relevant audience. One of my curiosities as a podcaster is how do you actually get into a digest? Is it if whatever the theme is, whatever the digest is talking about, if they happen to have scrolled through all the podcast transcripts and you've just said the thing most succinctly, then your clip gets pulled? What does that look like? How does AI, I'm guessing, is making these decisions? How does the AI determine which clips to pull?
So that's built into our AI system and how we're structuring prompts, which is a little different for each bubble. Sometimes, and our first example started with sports teams. And so we built those prompts around common narratives throughout these transcripts. And so it was here's a synthesis of what people were talking about over this past week. And then the clips were related to these thematic headlines. And so as you're reading the digest, there's a big headline, there's a paragraph to read about it, and then there's clips that correspond and they give additional context to what built that narrative. And so there's a bit of a black box, to be quite honest.
Sure.
We have lists built on the back end of all of these podcasts, and we curate them and collect them, and then we run it through our system. And we don't really, it's not like we're sitting there like, pick this one. That's part of the magic, is that we use AI to find these commonalities and sometimes contrasting points or narratives or competing elements to build, here is what you want to discover throughout this week, based on how we're building the prompts into that bubble. And so if it's Bitcoin, like, there's completely different things that we're looking for, and versus the Thunder basketball, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's really cool. So how long is the weekly digest? And then also, are there updates to it on a daily basis, or is it kind of once a week you hop in there and you catch up with all the relevant information?
So right now it has 6 key themes. And so it probably takes about 15 minutes to read through the entire thing. But the clips are all different links. And so you can go in there. Some of them may have a 30-second to a 2-minute clip. Some of them may be closer to 5 minutes. You can pull those clips into a player and say you want to go for a walk. You could listen to those clips all back to back connected like it is one podcast all together. And so you get all of your bases covered for that week, and you get to have a picture of what was said in a particular community. What I think is a little interesting with this model is it creates a way for podcasters to build content and have show content off of other people's shows. And so I directly stole this from No Agenda and Adam Curry's show, who built Podcasting 2.0. And I loved how the No Agenda show, they brought in media clips, and then their show is pretty much them sitting there dissecting that clip and making fun of it. And so as a podcaster, you could use the Bubbl in that way. You could go in there and you could find all the clips, and then you could say, okay, well, I'm going to use the Bubbl to build a show and comment on top of the commentary that happened in the Bitcoin space this week.
That's really interesting. Would there be a possibility in the future of creating your own Bubbl? I guess it would be a sub category within financial markets, geopolitics, Bitcoin, college football, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any of that personalization that's possible, or is that too complex because there are additional prompts and things like that on the back end that the team would need to set up?
We're actually moving towards that architecture. And so when we set out to build this, that was not what was in mind. It was proving that we could actually build a digest and have it look and feel like we want it to, and written, and it doesn't sound like it's written by an AI or something like that. And so, but now we're moving towards an agentic system, which I'm not sure if the audience is familiar or not. There's a lot of talk about AI agents. And so the last paradigm, which was around generative AI, LLM prompting, you had some shortcomings that were pretty obvious. So like context windows of AI would run short, and there were cutoff days. And at the end of the day, it still took a human to receive and facilitate something out of that AI to extract value. And so now with agents and agent frameworks, you can build in reasoning and memory and goals around these things and have them act somewhat autonomously with a little bit of the directive of the generative AI system. And so you can still have a little bit of control with the prompts, but allow it to make its own decisions within a set of goals that you define for it. And so all that being said, we're moving towards a system where, yes, you'll be able to create your own Bubbl, and we will be able to pull and create bubbles from any podcast in the world. And so instead of just, here's like a predefined list of all the podcasts in Bitcoin, it will be any podcast in the world that mentions Bitcoin. Maybe it's Joe Rogan, and he's not, quote unquote, a Bitcoin podcaster, but he may have a 2-minute clip that's pretty relevant. And so right now, the Bubbl Digest is static. That gets delivered once a week. But we are very close to making that in real time. And so you'll just have a digest, and it will update every single day based on the latest information. And so it won't be like fully real time, but you'll see a mix of ever-changing data based on the new narrative.
Yeah. So we had probably about a month ago, maybe at this point a little bit more than a month, we had Christopher David from Open Agents on talking about the upcoming agentic economy. And obviously we're talking about DeepSeek and Stargate at that point in time, and sort of how open protocols are the answer to a lot of people's concerns about AI in the future. So I think people are increasingly familiar with the idea of individual agents, and I think it's really interesting to hear what you guys are doing about it. I'm curious to know, you've talked about the white mirror, black mirror element. How does something like Bubbl fit into that way of looking at the world?
Yeah, so I would start the conversation around open protocols. And so if we originally look at what RSS was meant to be, is it was meant to be just like Bitcoin as an open protocol that anybody could use and share and build on and host openly. And now with podcasting 1.0, I'm sure you're familiar with some of this narrative as well. The big companies have centralized those indexes, and they've also now, like Spotify for creators, has centralized a lot of the creation around some of these new podcasting features. And so, I mean, these chapters and live transcripts and artwork that carousels throughout the player, and ways to engage and connect with your audience in real time during a show. These things should be native and open for everybody to use, but they're also extremely time consuming on the podcaster's end. And so I like to look at AI as a productivity enhancer. And so I had a podcast back in the day. I'm very familiar with the amount of work that it takes to make your RSS feed and your description quality, especially if you have a business show like this. You want to highlight your guests. You need to take time aggregating all these links. And sometimes I was catching myself, like I'd record a show for an hour and it took me just an hour to make the description look good. And so since we started this company analyzing transcripts with AI, it's pretty trivial for us to transcribe all your podcasts and build summaries in real time. And then since we also have the 2.0 players, we can inject chapters in there without you having to think about it. And we don't want you to have to think about your guest information and aggregating all of their links. That should be tagging a profile, because podcasters and guests that go on podcasts frequently should have a profile that they can share. And so that's one of the things that we'll be building into this is, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show started, of how difficult it is to find guests. And so part of this podcasting platform will be a connection for podcasters and guests to see profiles about each other and then facilitate a booking on a show. And then you can see a profile as a guest of, these were the podcasts that I went on. Here's my company information. Here are my links. And then we share this back and forth. So we get it to a point where a podcaster basically can just give us an MP3 file. Their show looks beautiful in the feed. They have a tag for their guests that has all their information auto-populated. They have rolling transcripts and summaries and chapters. And we sort of automate some of these podcasting 2.0 features. And then we tap you right into the podcast index. And so, like, we're not trying to confine podcasters to our platform. These things should be open. And so these things will all now be native inside the index for all the other 2.0 apps to take advantage of. And so I think it's somewhere around 7 to 10% of the podcast index actually has transcripts in their RSS feed. We need to make that number way higher. Like, seeing a floating Star Wars text in your podcast feed should be a normal interaction. And seeing the RSS feed should not be this static, description that truthfully most people don't look at. A lot of podcasters spend all of this time building it, and then most people don't even look at it because it's ugly. And so how do we turn that into where a podcaster can come record a show, publish it through our platform, because we'll have hosting. And so they'll be able to hip fire an MP3, and then within 2 to 3 minutes, everything is automatically injected in their RSS feed. They didn't have to do anything. And then we'll give them some content as well, clips, videos that are auto-generated in their dashboard for them to one-click post their podcast to X. And so just new and innovative ways to share content, utilizing some of this generative AI, and then making podcasters' lives easier.
Excellent. Well, that's exciting for me to hear as a podcaster, and I know there will probably be a number of people listening to this who also have podcasts, and so hopefully people will be checking out Bubbl. Are those features available now, or is that something for in the future?
So we are very close to launching our beta testing for podcast services. The Podcast 2.0 player, all of that's already open out there. You can come on, you can subscribe to digests. I think it'll be next week we'll be able to open up our first beta test for podcasters, and the connecting platform will be rolling out shortly after. So I'll definitely be sending you an invite. I'd love for you to come just try it out, test it, and tear it apart for us.
For sure. And so I want to get back to the general user before we finish up today. So right now it's kind of in beta, but people can go to bubbl.fm, and that's bubbl.fm, and they can sign up for their first Bubbl for free. Additional Bubbles, I think, cost something. But any recommendations, what you think people should do to optimize their experience? Or is it as simple as signing up, selecting your Bubbl, and just checking out the digest every week?
Yeah, I would say definitely start with the free one. One of the chicken or the egg problems we have is most people don't really know what the Bubbl is, even when I describe it, until they can see it and conceptualize it. So we made the first Bubbl free. This is a Bitcoin podcast, so I recommend the Bitcoin Bubbl or the financial markets Bubbl. And then once you have an account with us, whenever you go into the podcast player, that's where all your subscriptions, being able to create clips, all of that stuff will be available. But if you don't have an account, then you won't be able to subscribe to a podcast. It will kind of lack that quality in some ways, which most podcast apps are like that. It's tied to an account. You can still listen though. So if you just want to go check out the player, you don't need an account to just go listen to a podcast or anything like that.
Yeah. And one thing that's really cool on your website is that it seems that you have an example of what one of these digests looks like. Like there's an image of a phone on your website and someone scrolling through. So you can get an idea of what it looks like. And I feel like that's really helpful. I think what you're doing is great. I'm interested to see how it develops, and I'm definitely interested in testing out Bubbl for myself. Kaz, do you have any final thoughts before we finish up? You've kind of already given a call to action, but feel free to reissue that as well.
Yeah, I would just say check out bubbl.fm. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's cool as well, at BTCKAZ. And the only advice I would have is to look at things through a white mirror. Technology is not inherently bad. It's how we build technology. And then at the extension of that is how we use it. And so if we can build technology that does not make us confined to usage in a way that we ultimately do not like, which part of what Bubbl is being able to find information about things you care about without scrolling social media or searching. And so we want to deliver that to you. And the last sort of product teaser I'll toss out there is we're building a podcast search engine as well. And so since we have all these transcripts and summaries and clips and everything, we vectorized a database. And so very soon we'll be able to roll out a way for you to just type into a chat and say, what is a Bitcoin podcast that talked about OpsCTV? And then it will connect you to all of those. And then once we have the tagging system in place for profiles and stuff, it will help you basically give you a way as a podcaster to just search and say, who is a guest that might be interested in talking about this? And then you can search in this interface. And then if they have a profile on Bubbl, you'll be able to just shoot them a message and book them on your show.
Very cool. Well, Kaz, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Josh.
Well, friends, it's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Business Bitcoinization Show. If you want to reach out to either me or Kaz, you can find those links down in the show notes, and check out bubbl.fm if you're interested in having curated content for your favorite topics. As always, keep building, keep growing, and until next time, keep living and leading well.